One of my favourite parts of the East Kent coast is the Cecil Road stretch at Kingsdown. This is at the northern end of the settlement, verging onto Walmer. Adjacent sections are the Groins at Boundary Road to the south and Walmer Castle to the north. I've covered these in previous videos. Here, a number of techniques work, including fishing for bass at long range at low tide and fishing live baits or dead baits close in for bass at the top of the tide and as it's ebbing. Here I've arrived just after high tide and I'm fishing a loop rig at range and a medium length wild boom rig for whatever I could catch. It's a spring tide and conditions are perfect for bass, but I've arrived a little bit late to focus on that. Having cast out my boom rig, I get a bite straight away. It's a little tap, but I don't strike into it. I'll wait a little bit longer until the fish has another go, then I'll strike. Twitching the bait often helps. No immediate takes on this occasion, so I lower the rod. I then get a proper take. As I strike into this fish, I'll quickly run through the locational details. First, the regional setting with some well-known venues nearby. There are plenty of familiar marks on the North Kent coast, and in particular those well known for ray and smoothhound fishing. To the east and north of Kingsdown, you've got Deal, Sandwich Bay and Pegwell Bay. Homing in, I'll identify some notable marks south of Cecil Road, then Walmer and Deal marks, then the marks north of Deal. The Cecil Road stretch is very similar to the Walmer marks to the north. However, the further south you go, there is a chalk hard ground which is within casting distance. If you're at Cecil Road and want to avoid losing tackle on this, then walk towards Walmer Castle. The map shows the two spots I fished for this video. It was a good bite, but doesn't feel like it's a decent fish. At least its pouting gets me off the mark. It's lip hooked and will survive when I put it back, so it'd be a shame to try and use it for bait to catch one of those bass. I'll wait until I get a deep hooked one, or one which is injured for that. I'm now ready to cast out my loop rig. This has got ragworm on both snods. I've got a size 1 on the top snod and a 1/0 on the lower one. I'm just off the chalk hard ground here, but I'm still hopeful of catching a bass at distance. I've had a few here in the past, but that's been in August and September rather than October. However, fishing's been a few weeks out of sync this year, so you never know. This session's in the second week of October. There's a little bit of wind, but it's very pleasant with reasonable temperatures, and I'm assuming the water isn't cold enough for the winter species to move in just yet. It doesn't take long to get my first bite on the loop rig. Unfortunately, the fish comes off on the way in. It looks like it's taken a bite out of a worm on the top hook. I see a bit of movement in the water close in, so I'm lobbing this rig out there in the hope I might get a take. That didn't work, so I'm back to fishing as I was before. This time I've swapped the rods round as the current direction's changed, and I get another bite on the rod with a boom rig. Another pouting, but a bit bigger than before. pouting number 3, which is ideal bait size, but once again it's hooked in the mouth and looks healthy, so it's going back. After returning this one, I catch one on the loop rig, which didn't look too healthy, so that's now been put on a running ledger and cast close in. In the meantime, I'm still getting bites on the boom rig, and this is pouting number 5. Back to trying the loop rig. One of the advantages of these rigs is that you can use long snuds, but when you clip down they're still very streamlined, so you can get extra distance on the cast. The bottom hook is clipped onto an imp immediately above the lead, and the top hook onto a cascade swivel. This is on the lower snud, about 6 inches above the hook. As I clip up you can see the loop and how streamlined the setup is. If you're interested in how to make these, and that's covered by my Walmart video, I'll leave a link to that in the top right hand corner and in the description for this video. The only bait I've got for this session is ragworm, and that's left over from a session elsewhere earlier in the morning. I'm using smaller rag and sections of rag on the boom rig. This has got size 4 and size 6 hooks. I've had a couple of knocks on a rod fishing the dead pouting, so I'm persisting with that, and alternating the use of a loop rig and a boom rig on the other rod. I'm still hopeful of catching something half decent. The tide's gone down quite a bit now, so I'm walking down the shingle to cast. Something has another go at my pouting, but the take's not positive enough to strike into. This happened 3 times during this session. On this occasion, a large chunk of its head went missing, and later on, the tail half of the fish was bitten off. I catch another pouting, but then it all went quiet until this last bite on my boom rig. Well, it is a bass, but not quite the size I was after. I stayed for a little bit longer, but apart from that last interest in my pouting, nothing else happened. So the session ended up with 7 pouting and that little bass. However, because I got some interest in the pouting fish down the edge, that meant I needed to come back to give it another go. 5 days later I was back. This time I'll be fishing the tide right up and over high water. I've brought an extra rod with me since I'm expecting that over high water one of them will be occupied fishing a pouting down the edge. So as well as my Karmic 07 rods, I've brought an Arcadia with me. I'll use the Arcadia to fish the boom rig, and the other 2 rods at first will be fished at distance, one with a loop rig, but this time with squid on the bottom hook, and the other with a 3-hook clip down rig. There's a good chance I might lose one of these rigs, since this time I'm fishing further towards Boundary Road. Since I'm starting at low water, I'll be casting onto the chalk hard ground, so I've got another loop rig on standby. In the past I have tried using lead lifts here, but that doesn't seem to make a lot of difference, you still lose gear. Towards high water, I'll swap one of these 07 rods over to fishing a pouting down the edge, but that's assuming I'm going to catch one which doesn't look like it's going to survive. In the previous session when I tried that, the tide was already about an hour down. I got a few indications, but I don't think they were from bass. I think the first one might have been from a couple of fish, and on the second occasion it could have been an eel, taking the tail end of a fish off. In either case, the rod didn't pull round far enough to warrant striking, so I'll never know. Here, I notice there's a loop in my line on the spool, so I need to remove that. Otherwise it might affect casting. Nowadays I don't get too many wind knots using braid, but you do need to be wary of it. I decided to fish these 2 rods for a bit over that chalk hard ground before casting out the other rod. Boom rig will be used later on, hopefully to try and catch some small fish, which will be potential bass bait. There isn't much of a tidal pull at the moment, which means I've got less of a chance of a rig being caught up on that chalk ledge. Although I didn't get any indications of what might look like fish, something had a go at that rag, so my hook baits need to be replaced. Just checking to make sure the lines haven't crossed. As I move one of the rods, I get my first bite. It feels like I've got something decent on. Unfortunately, I feel something give way. I'm just left with a load of weed. If there was a fish on, I don't think it was properly hooked. Though it's a bit early, I can't resist trying the boom rig. This is only cast about 40 to 50 yards out. The tide has now come in up to my tripod. It's time to start thinking about moving up the beach. I'll get this rod ready for recasting, but I'll take that up the slope, but I won't bring any other two rods just yet. The longer I can leave the other two rigs out, the better my chances of getting a bite. I didn't see any bites, but as I'm reeling in my boom rig, I feel there's something on. Well, that's a bit of luck. It's a flounder. Weather's warmed up, but fishing's gone very quiet. Nothing happened until the tides come up to my tripod again. Unfortunately, I don't connect with this bite. Time to move to what I think is a strand line. Since this is a smaller tide from last time, it won't be right to the top of the slope. On recasting, I get a bite on my 3-hook clip down rig, and it feels like a decent fish. Well, it's not a bass, but a reasonably sized dogfish. Then get my first pouting on a boom rig, but it looks like it's going to survive, so it's going back. foul hook pouting on a loop rig. It's also got a cut in its belly and looks half dead, so it isn't going to survive, so I'll put it out of its misery and put it on as bait. Another bite on a 3-hook clip down rig. Although I can feel the fish, I also think I've got snagged up. Since I can't budge it, I'll try from another angle. Still stuck, so I'm going to have to pull for a break. Unfortunately, I lose that rig, so I reset up a rod for fishing that dead pouting. There's many different ways of mounting the fish, but I'm using 2 circle hooks pennelled. The one in its top lip is a 5/0 and the other one's a 7/0. I have my lead free running over about a metre length of line, but it still acts as a bolt rig. I'm casting this well to my left and about 5 metres from the water's edge. Next bite again comes to the loop rig. Another pouting on the ragworm. It's just before the top of tide, so bites are picking up, this time on a boom rig. That's the result. Double shot, a half decent whiting and a dab. The next proper bite comes to the loop rig. Dogfish number 2, but once again it's on the ragworm and not on the squid. To prevent the sandpaper-like skin doing damage to your hand, it's best to move the tail up to its head and hold it that way. Sometimes the hard mouth of a dogfish makes it difficult to get a hook out, in which case you're going to need to use pliers. Fortunately, I don't need to do that in this case. Another decent whiting on a boom rig. And the whiting's followed by an eel. That eel's messed up my boom rig, which needs sorting out, but soon afterwards I'll get another bite on the loop rig. The fish snags me, but I'll give it a little bit of time and then have another go at pulling it out of that snag. Something gives, but I still feel the fish on. Another dogfish on a ragworm, but this time the bottom half of my rig's gone missing. A pretty enjoyable session with 6 different species. I didn't get a bite from a bass, and I did lose a rig and a half. However, the 3 dogfish were half decent in size.